Welcome, students. Today we're going to talk about angles, specifically vertical angles, adjacent angles, complementary angles, supplementary angles, and congruent angles with respect to lines that intersect at a common point. So let's talk about vertical angles first. With vertical angles, the main thing I want to emphasize is that when we have two lines that intersect, it forms two pair of vertical angles. And vertical angles are congruent, and that's what we're going to talk about down here. So under congruent angles, I actually want to put that vertical angles are congruent. Vertical are congruent. Now, the vertical angles are specifically ones that are across from each other. So this angle here and this angle here would be considered vertical angles. Likewise, this angle here with respect to this angle here would be considered vertical angles. So I want to emphasize that vertical angles doesn't necessarily mean one's above and the other one's below. They could be to the right or left. So if I look over here in this figure, we have these six angles, angle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 1 and 4 would be considered a pair of vertical angles. 1 and 4 would be considered a pair of vertical angles. This one here and this one here. Another pair of vertical angles would be 2 and 5. So I would say 2 and 5 is a pair of vertical angles. This one here and this one here. The other pair of vertical angles would be 3 and 6. 3 and 6. So there are three pairs of vertical angles in that figure. The next thing I want to talk about is what we mean by adjacent angles. Adjacent angles basically are two angles that share a common side. So for instance, if I was to look at, let's go with this figure over here, angles 4 and 5 would be considered adjacent angles because they share a side in common. They share this side right, if I can stay on that line, along this side right here. They share that side in common. So if two angles share a side, then they are considered adjacent. So another pair, even though 4 and 5 are adjacent, 4 and 3 would also be considered adjacent because they share this side in common. So I could say 4 and 3 are adjacent angles. Likewise, I could say 3 and 2 are adjacent angles. That's this angle here and here because they share this side in common. So 3 and 2 are considered adjacent angles. I could consider 2 and 1 adjacent because they share this side in common. So 2 and 1. I could also consider 1 and 6 adjacent angles. 1 and 6. And last of all, 6 and 5. Or 5 and 6, whichever order you want to put the angles. It doesn't matter which one you say first. 5 and 6 would be considered adjacent angles because they share this side in common. Now let's talk about complementary angles. Complementary angles are angles that add up to 90 degrees. Now, we all know that this little right angle here in this figure means it's a right angle. So angle 3 is 90 degrees. But that's not a complementary angle because complementary is a pair of angles that add up to 90. So I want to emphasize that if 3 is a right angle, then 6 is also a right angle, 90 degrees. But again, that's not a complementary angle. But these two together must be. 4 and 5 put together is 90 degrees. Thus, 4 and 5, angles 4 and 5 are complementary angles because they add up to 90. I don't know what they are individually. One might be 30, the other one might be 60, one might be 20, the other is 70. But the two together must add up to 90. We have one other pair of complementary angles. That'd be 1 and 2 because the two together would be another 90 degrees. So angles 1 and 2 would be considered complementary angles. Supplementary angles are a little bit hard to see in this figure. So what I want to do is I want to go to the next slide to talk about supplementary angles. Supplementary angles add up to 180 degrees. So if I was to look at this figure, and I'm going to designate these angles differently because I'm not going to do them as angles 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to be able to realize that there's actually a larger angle here. I'm going to talk about angle. I'm going to use this angle symbol, and then I'm going to use the letters C, E, and A to represent this angle right here that comes in from C, turns at E, and goes out at A. So I'm talking this angle right here. That angle is supplementary to angle DEA because the two together add up to 180, right? That's this angle here. This angle plus this complete angle is equal to 180 degrees, okay? So if two angles add up to 180, they are called supplementary. There's one other pair of supplementary angles in here, and that pair would be angles DEB and angles with angle CEB, which means I'm talking this complete angle here and this angle there. So those two angles add up to 180, so they're supplementary. Remember, complementary add up to 90 degrees. The only ones that we really know that are congruent would be considered vertical angles. There are no vertical angles in this figure, but on the last slide there was lots of vertical angles. So we could know about the vertical angles in here. So hopefully this information will allow you to do today's assignment. If you do have questions, please get on during my class office hours, and I will help you with those questions.